Brought to you by great listeners just like yourselves. Just go over to the Patreon page, patreon.com/Phillies, and you can subscribe and help support this podcast for only $1 or $2 a month, and I'd really appreciate it. Here's this edition of Phillies Talk, the preview with the Cincinnati Reds.
Here's the stretch by Robinson. The 3-0 pitch. Swing a long drive. There it is. Number 500. The career 500th home run for Michael Jack Schmidt. And the Phillies have regained the lead in Pittsburgh, 8-6. And the Phillies dugout comes swarming out to home plate.
Phillies Talk Podcast is now listener supported. Just go to our Patreon page at Patreon, patreon.com/Phillies, and you can sponsor this podcast.
Welcome to Phillies Talk, the independent podcast from FightinPhillies.com, featuring news and views about Phillies baseball.
Hi, this is Gary Matthews. You listen to the Fightin' Phillies podcast.
And welcome to this edition of Phillies Talk. It's the Phillies Talk podcast. It's the longest-running independent show talking about the Philadelphia Phillies. My name is Rich Baxter, and finally some great news to talk about for Phillies fans. We actually won a baseball game this afternoon in Philadelphia. Took us extra innings to do it. And wow, what a great thing it is to actually win a game. The Phillies have been on such a slide lately. It's been incredible. They were in a 5-game losing streak going into today's game against the Colorado Rockies. Of course, this was the last of 4 games played at Citizens Bank Park between the Rockies and the Phillies. And the Phillies brought their 15-29 record into this game. And if you're wondering, yes, that is the worst in the majors as of the time we're doing this podcast here. And it's the worst in the National League. 15 wins for this baseball team. It's hard to believe that I'm actually talking about the Phillies in the same breath as saying the worst team in Major League Baseball. Very hard to believe. But the Phillies did earn an extra innings win today, and that could snap this long drought for the Phillies. Just watched a press conference with Pete Mackanin talking about how great it is to actually just win a game. He had a smile on his face. He's been in a lot of pressure to produce a few wins here, and the team has been on a steady slide on a downward slope for the last several weeks, probably since the Phillies went out on the road and they went out to L.A. About this time last month. The whole month of May has been just an abysmal time for the Phillies. Let's look at some of the stats. Prior to today's win, they were 1-9 in their last 10 games. They were threatened to get swept again. They've already been swept 4 times by other teams this year, so this would have been the 5th, but it was not to be for the Phillies, as they did earn the victory today. Some notes about the Rockies and the Phillies in the series. It was all Rockies. I mean, if you were a Rockies fan, you thought the Rockies were going straight to the World Series. But they could not do it today, despite having Charlie Blackmon, who would probably be called the MVP of the series for the Rockies, make it to third base in extra innings, but he could not score. And that would have really broke the Phillies back hadn't they been able to win this game, as we're about to welcome in the Cincinnati Reds for a weekend series here on Memorial Day weekend. And what a fast time it's been to get to Memorial Day weekend for baseball. We're already almost 2 full months into the season. The Phillies playing their 49th game of the year today, or somewhere around there, late 40s. So The Phillies have a good number of games in. They're just performing terribly, but that win sort of puts them back on an even keel, so to speak. It gives them a little bit of steam to go into the weekend series, welcoming in Cincinnati, who were in their own battle, the Battle of Ohio, playing the Cleveland Indians, but they actually got rained out on Thursday's game there in Cleveland, so they'll be heading to Philadelphia for the weekend series. That battle with Cleveland is not over for Ohio for them, but a little bit later in this podcast, I hope to welcome aboard a member of the Cincinnati Reds blog, and they're a great group called Red Leg Nation podcast. And a little bit later in the podcast, we'll welcome aboard one of their podcasters to talk with us and let us know how the Cincinnati Reds have been doing. A little bit of scouting here. We'll see who's been performing the best for them and maybe what we could expect to see on this weekend series with them. It's been a tough time to watch baseball for Phillies fans. I've been monitoring the Twitter feed and, of course, sending out a lot of tweets myself, trying not to stay negative, but it's very difficult. A lot of fans were going overboard last night, of course, when they gave up 7 runs in the one inning and ended up losing by a score of 7-2. The Phillies just seemed like there was no end in sight for this losing streak, and a lot of the fans really were just jumping off the bandwagon in bunches. They weren't going to watch them anymore, but they're out there still watching. Once you're a Phillies fan or a baseball fan in general, you like a certain team, it's really hard not to tune in at certain times. The Phillies got that much-needed win today. Well, little notes, Obadell Herrera had a terrible game this afternoon. I don't know what's wrong with Obadell Herrera. I just don't know. Either he's not comfortable, they say maybe he's trying too hard, but he's not being successful if he is trying too hard, for sure. But he's just not making contact with the ball. A lot of strikeouts, him and Michael Franco. They just have to try to make contact. Don't try to hit a home run over the fence. Try to hit the ball. See what happens. Put it in play. Slap at it. Do a little Pete Rose action. Choke up on the bat maybe. Hit that ball out there and see if it can find some open field. There's a ton of open field on that baseball diamond. So it's amazing that some of these players are just trying to do too much. They're trying to hit the ball out of the park just about every play. We've seen that with Franco darn near coming out of his shoes sometimes. But there is a bright note to talk about with Herrera. He's been ranked as one of the best defensive players in baseball, so thank goodness for that, because if his offense and his defense were equal right now, I think you'd be seeing somebody else in center field for the Phillies, even though they had just given him a 5-year deal. He's been very terrible on offense. He does not come through in the clutch at any time. Maybe Matt Stairs can start to work with him a little bit and just have him relax, have him make contact with the ball. Even if he was to hit it, that's half of the battle there. We've often seen a lot of teams try to hit the ball off of the home plate area, try to bounce it up possibly, but just make contact with the ball. That's half of the battle, and that's not what these Phillies are doing. So I think we'll take a break in the podcast here. We'll come back and talk a little more Phillies baseball, and then hopefully we'll be welcoming in the Red Leg Nation podcast to talk a little bit about the Phillies' opponent coming in for the weekend series, Memorial Day weekend here, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, against the Cincinnati Reds. And a lot to talk about with that team. Of course, they used to have a famous player that both teams used to share back in the 80s. Of course, Pete Rose will talk a little bit about upcoming great event that they have scheduled to honor him on the Phillies Wall of Fame coming up in August. And I'll be talking with Jordan Barhorst from the Red Leg Nation podcast. Wow, that's a real podcaster's name, Jordan Barhorst. Very interested to talk with him about the Cincinnati Reds and how they're doing. But let's take that break. We'll be back talking a little Phillies, and then we'll talk with Jordan Barhorst from the Red Leg Nation podcast.
Sponsor an ad on the Phillies Talk podcast. Support our show and let people know about your business. Email us today. Follow us on Twitter at Fightin' Phillies or on our website, fightinphillies.com.
Hi, this is Farley.
And Mark from Baseball PhD.
Thanks for listening to BaseballPodcast.net.
Up next, another great episode of Phillies Talk.
Hi, this is Gary Matthews. You're listening to Fightin' Phillies Talk Podcast.
Brewtown Sports is your source for Brewers news and notes. Join Mr. Brewtown as he keeps you up to date on all the happenings of your Milwaukee Brewers and Major League Baseball. Follow the show on Facebook and Twitter, Brewtown Sports. Listen 24/7 at brewtownsports.podomatic.com.
Hi, this is Gary Mack of Mets Musing, and you're listening to my good friend Rich Baxter on Phillies Talk, right here on BaseballTalkRadio.com, the home of great baseball talk shows.
And welcome back to this edition of Phillies Talk Podcast. We're going to sneak a few stats in here before we bring on Jordan Barhorst from the Red Leg Nation podcast to talk about Cincinnati and their Reds coming into town for the weekend series. Little scouting action there. But let's sneak a few Philly stats in for a minute or two here. Leading the batting average for the Phillies is Alan Altair with a .295 batting average so far. And he also leads the team in home runs with 8 home runs. In RBIs, it's Michael Franco. He's still at the top of the list there, even though he sat a couple of games in the Colorado Rockies series. He's got 28 RBIs. On-base percentage is Aaron Altair again, .386. And then leading the Phillies in hits, it's Cesar Hernandez with 54. So a little bit of the power is spread over the Phillies. It's not one guy just dominating everything. And like I said at the beginning of the podcast, if the Phillies could just put the bat on the ball a little bit more, better things will happen for them. And that goes for Franco, goes for Oberdell Herrera, even Freddie Galvis. A strikeout is what you want to avoid being a young player like this. Just make some contact. They need to watch some old Pete Rose tapes, VHS if they have to go back to that, if they can't find it on YouTube. But I'm sure you could find it. Maybe the Phillies video team can get some of that together. If you can remember back to those days, and I can, I'm kind of an older Phillies fan, but I can remember the days when Pete Rose would just choke up on the bat and look for something to hit. Put the bat on the ball. It's going to sail over the infield, find some daylight. That's how he got 4,000-plus hits. I mean, it's very simple. Just watch a few Pete Rose films, and some of these guys are going to improve their careers by doing that. We'll take a look at the pitching stats here. Leading the team with wins, Jeremy Hellickson. Of course, he lost last night. He's 5 wins on the season, picked up his second loss on the year. ERA, it's Jeremy Hellickson again. He leads the team with a 4.28 ERA, and that's not a great ERA to have your starting pitcher, your best starting pitcher, have on the club. Strikeouts, it's Vince Velasquez, and we've been waiting for Velasquez to show his last year stuff where he really started to dominate some of these teams. But this year, especially his last start, he had a very rough outing again. And he was very confused even after the game, made some comments where he just doesn't know what's going wrong. So maybe Bob McClure can help him out. And if Bob McClure can't, maybe he can seek help somewhere. Because Velasquez has what it takes to be a good pitcher. He's not locating his pitches good. And the catcher's calling for one thing, he's throwing another. They have to look into that and see if they can correct that. Well, for saves, Hector Neris is leading the way so far with 4 on the year. And guess who got the win today to close out the Colorado Rocky series? Jeanmar Gomez. Welcome back. He was just activated, and he picks up a win for the Phillies. That's this baseball game. That's the game of baseball. You're out for a week or 10 days, 2 weeks. You get a clutch hit, and now you're the hero. You pick up a win or a home run if you happen to be an offensive player, and you're back in the good graces. So maybe this is a road for Jeanmar Gomez to come back on for the Phillies and show that he has what it takes to be on this relieving core and possibly even to be in that closer's role again. We saw him do it so well last year. Most of the time, he did have some struggles towards the end of the season, but he did a masterful job for a lot of the way for the Phillies last year. Well, let's bring on a guest that I've been waiting to bring on and talk to for a few minutes here, scouting the Cincinnati Reds. And I'd like to give a big Phillies Talk podcast welcome to Jordan Barhorst from the Red Leg Nation podcast.
Hey, thanks, Rich. How you doing?
Hey, nice to talk to you. And how's your Cincinnati Reds doing this year?
It's been up and down. I think it depends who you ask. It's this season could either be deemed a complete success so far, or it could be a disappointment. Depending who you ask. Again, a lot of us came into the season kind of not expecting much, and then the season came around, and you've got guys like Zach Cozart and Eugenio Suarez and Joey Votto putting up huge numbers, and you start to have flashbacks to those early 2010 teams, who were obviously really good. But the pitching staff's not been doing that great. So, I'm sure we'll get into that eventually. So, yeah, it all depends on who you ask and what your expectations were coming into the season.
Yeah, I appreciate you joining us here on the podcast, and I know you're in transit, so I appreciate you making time to talk with us on the Reds. Why don't you tell us a little bit about Red Leg Nation podcast? How long have you been involved with it and things like that?
Yeah, so Red Leg Nation podcast, I've actually not been on the podcast, but it's been a thing for quite a long time now. Our editor, Chad Dotson, sort of runs that, and they do a pretty good job of talking Reds as often as they can, and hopefully I've been bothering Chad to get me on the podcast one of these days. We'll see if that happens. I'm hoping that happens soon. But yeah, they do a really good job. They've got a couple of really good guests every once in a while. Some Reds players have come on and talked with them and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's great. I'd love to have extra people around volunteering to be on the podcast, especially for Phillies Talk. So, yeah, I would say, Chad, get Jordan on the show. He's an excellent Cincinnati Reds analyst, as we've heard already. The Reds are almost a 500 ball club. They're 22-24. They got rained out today in Cleveland, and I was kind of scouting them a little bit myself, and I was very surprised to read that the battle for Ohio has been going on for 20 years between those two teams, the Indians and the Reds.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that it kind of depends who you ask. I think Cleveland fans are a little less interested nowadays than Reds fans. They've got kind of higher hopes for the team in Cleveland than the Reds do. But if we can go into we're 2-1 against them in the series so far. So if we can take 3 out of 4 games against the team that was in the World Series last year, I think that's pretty good.
Yeah, that's excellent. Today's game has been rained out, and it'll be made up in July, on July 24th, between those Indians and the Reds, and that's quite a battle. I know the Phillies just partook in a battle for Pennsylvania. They played the Pirates about a week ago, so I understand that cross-state rivalry is very important. And as you said, the Indians have been a great team, and just the Reds being able to hang with them is a success for them. The last time I remember hearing, like you said, back in the 2010 era, is the last time I really remember hearing the Reds in playoff mode when Dusty Baker was there. And it seemed like a lot of buzz was happening with the Reds, but then they just couldn't elevate themselves higher up into the playoffs. Are they appearing to make some sort of a run this year, or do you think they're just sort of staying 500 and they're going to be content with that?
Well, I think if you were to ask me coming into the season, I don't think I would have ever admitted that I thought the team could make the playoffs. The team is just not built to be a playoff team right now, and that's fine. We're right in the middle of a rebuild, and we've had the top two picks in the last 2 years. So obviously the playoffs have been far away from this team. But all you can ask for this team, I think, is to be 500, and if they can prove that they're going to be over 500, which I think there's probably a good possibility that we could be over 500 in the second half of the season. They could find their way sneaking in, especially if the rest of the division decides to keep slumbering throughout the season.
Yeah, the Cubs have stumbled a little bit, although they've regained their momentum in the last week or so. But as you said, yeah, the Reds are one of those teams that I think the Phillies should be playing more in the season. They're a National League opponent, and it just doesn't seem like the Reds and the Phillies get together that often, just like the Pittsburgh Pirates, teams like the Brewers. With the American League interleague play involved with some of these National League teams, we suffer a little bit with those rivalries that used to exist in the National League.
Yeah, and we've had the opportunity to play the Phillies in the opening series of the season for 2 years now. So, outside of that, I can't really, remember any standout games, Reds versus Phillies in the last couple of years. Obviously, there's the playoff series from a couple of years ago that Reds fans hate to talk about. But outside of that, you're right. The Phillies definitely put up a good fight every time we play them, and they're a team that I definitely like watching.
So for the Cincinnati Reds, I'll just read off some of the stats, the best offensive stats for the team. Scott Schabler, and I hope I'm saying his name right, 13 home runs on the year. Zach Cozart with a .340 batting average. And runs batted in so far as Joey Votto with 38 runs batted in. And we've heard Votto's name associated with the Reds practically his whole career. Do you think he's going to stay there much longer?
I do, and he's signed to play for the Reds until 2025 or something crazy like that. So he'll be sticking around. He's making enough money that he's virtually untradeable anyway. So he'll be, and I think he's on record saying he wants to be a Red for life. He likes Cincinnati, he likes the town, and I think we're starting to grow to like him back. He was a little polarizing for a few years there. As the blue-collar town was getting used to this guy that preferred to get on base rather than drive guys in. And, it's taken a while, but I think this year, we're really starting to come around and appreciate Joey Votto as he should be. And it doesn't hurt that, I think he said he had a high 30s RBIs so far throughout the season. So he is starting to drive in those guys. And, a lot of that is more guys getting on base ahead of him.
Another longtime Red I was surprised to see the other day was Bronson Arroyo. Of course, he's been with the Reds a long time. I think in 2014 he was traded over to the Arizona Diamondbacks, but now he's back as a 40-year-older. I guess he's about ready to, end his career as well with the Reds.
Yeah, it looks like that could be the case. I think he's trying to give it one last go. So he was hurt in his time with the Diamondbacks, and I think he went to a couple of other clubs, one of the Los Angeles teams. He came back, was working out in Cincinnati. He has friends here in town, so he was working out at Great American Ballpark, and we gave him a chance. We signed him to a contract. Some injuries happened in spring training, and he's given a shot to go out there every fifth day and pitch. The results haven't necessarily been there as you might want them to be, but as far as going out and having someone on the mound to pitch every fifth day, that's more than you can ask about a lot of the pitchers that are under contract currently.
Yeah, and we've had a pitcher very similar to him named Jamie Moyer a few years ago. I think Moyer pitched till he was 41 or maybe even 42, but yeah, very surprised to see Arroyo. I thought he was out of the game. His last games were played in 2014 prior to starting with the Reds this year, but great to see him back on the mound. And before we close out this interview with Scouting the Reds, I wanted to just talk a little bit about Pete Rose. I wonder if you're old enough to have ever seen Pete Rose play, and how does the Cincinnati Reds fans really feel about Pete Rose?
Well, I honestly, unfortunately, not old enough to have seen Pete play, but I know that I don't think there's one player, past or present, that Reds fans are more passionate about than Pete Rose. I don't think the guy can do anything wrong in this town, regardless of whether you think that he should be banned from baseball or included in the Hall of Fame or all of that. I don't think there's any denying that the guy has some charisma, and Cincinnati guys really, really fall in love with guys with charisma and guys that can get out there and give an interview, and the grit factor's there too. He's, I don't think there's anything more gritty than getting the most hits, and more the hits than anyone in Major League history. So, I think everyone in Cincinnati really, really likes Pete Rose. I think they will until he's either reinstated or not reinstated. I don't think it matters. He'll be, a true Cincinnatian for the rest of his life.
Yes, indeed. And I hearken back to the days of the 70s and 80s watching baseball, so I was around to watch Pete Rose play. In fact, in this podcast, I was saying that some of the Phillies should go back and watch some of the old Pete Rose tapes. Just put the bat on the ball, and that's what Pete did the best. He swung the bat, made contact with the ball, and he got over 4,000 hits, so you can't argue with that. Of course, the Phillies going to be inducting him into the Phillies Wall of Fame in August. So that's a great honor for him. I know the Reds had already honored him in Cincinnati. So Pete Rose going to get a little more good PR this year over in Philadelphia, and I'm going to try my best to be at that game. I did meet him once over the years, and it was just awe-inspiring. It was at an opening of a Kmart, believe it or not, and by the time I was on lunch at my job, I went over there. By the time I had gotten there was nobody left in line to see him, so I just walked up, introduced myself, got an autograph. He had run out of his pictures by then, and he had signed on to just a regular piece of paper, a photographed copy of a photo. But it was an awesome time to meet him, and he's quite a giant in the game.
Yeah, he is. My favorite Pete Rose story actually just took place a couple of weeks ago. He was on the Reds broadcast on television, and he was speaking with one of the on-field reporters, and Billy Hamilton was on base, and he looks over to the on-field reporter and says, "How much do you want to bet he's going to steal second right here?" And you could just see the reporter just kind of face palm, and you heard some chuckles from the crew in the background. It's pretty funny, and I think if that had been anyone else, you'd be getting some riots in the streets from Cincinnati fans. But like I said, Pete can do no wrong in this town. And it just turned out to be more of a funny thing than anything too serious.
Yeah, that's got to bring a smile to some people's faces. Although a lot of Pete Rose fans would just love him to zip up his mouth and not say those kind of things. He's so close to getting a welcome back into baseball in general, and maybe even making it to the Hall of Fame. Who knows? We'll have to find out. But it'll be great to welcome your Cincinnati Reds into Philadelphia for this Memorial Day weekend here, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And good luck to the Reds. And Jordan Barhorst from RedLegNation.com and the Red Leg Nation podcast. Thanks for joining me. Can you tell people where they can find you on the web?
Yeah, you can visit the Reds blog at RedLegNation.com. We're on Twitter, we're on Facebook, all that. And you can follow me on Twitter at Jordan Barhorst as well. So thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Thanks very much for joining us, Jordan. Nice talking with you.